back to Rolling Solo. My name is Adam Smith, and today I'm very excited as we're digging into a new top 10 here on the channel. This time we're focusing on the publisher Awaken Realms. In the prior two top 10s that I did recently, one for Come On Games and the other for Fantasy Flight Games, had a lot of fun putting together a list for the solo community as to my interest of the different titles across the catalog for that specific publisher, really. So here we are with Awaken Realms, and you can see from the thumbnail, the title, you can see on Board Game Geek here, we got the Awaken Realms publisher up on the screen. I'm even wearing my Awaken Realms sweater just to go absolutely ridiculous. I feel really bad about this because this sweater has been sitting in my closet for a while and I hadn't actually tried it on. A light bulb went off today when I was like, oh, I'm going to film this Awaken Realms video. And I was like, wait, I've got an actual sweater for this publisher. I should absolutely wear it. And then I threw it on and now I don't want to take it off because it's bloody comfortable. And it also fits like a glove. Like it fits much better if I was to stand up. It's like perfect. It's like baggy down here with the pocket inside. Ugh, it's awesome. I like it. I like it. I like it. So I've got this one here. Of course, this calls back to Nemesis because of the cat and the Cheetos and everything else. If you were part of the Nemesis campaign anywhere along the line, you know that that is all wrapped up in that space. I also have one that is a raccoon on the front too. So I got some options. Long story short, we're going to go through the top 10 right now. There's no honorable mentions whatsoever for this list. So that's the only difference I want to say between this one and the most recent top 10 I did for Fantasy Flight Games, where there was, again, their catalog being quite longer because they've been around for much longer. With Awaken Realms, I have a hard and fast 10 games. And of course, some games are full on eliminated because they just didn't have a solo mode, but the majority, if not all, of what Awaken Realms puts out, especially current day within the last 5 to 6 years, has always had a solo aspect to it, which I really appreciate. So without further ado, let's dig into number 10. The number 10 position on my list begins with Siege Storm. This came out in 2019. This is a game that actually has been around for a little bit. It's kind of gone under the radar for the most part because Awaken Realms larger sized games usually get all the glamour and the looks and everything else. These smaller ones typically fall into Awaken Realms Light area or division of the publishing house in general. So they come out, but they don't always typically get a lot of eyes on those smaller ones. But this is one that I got and I actually had in my collection. I no longer have it. It's reviewed at a, a good level, but that's for the base game. I wouldn't recommend picking up just this in terms of the original Siege Storm. I would pick up the re-implementation, which is the Siege mode. That one actually has specific bumps for the solo play that you're going to want to keep your eye on. Things like special AI decks that really makes playing solo and two-player co-op, as it mentions, possible. So that's going to be what you want to gun for if you're looking after this one. And as you can see, like the artwork and stuff like that and the look and feel of the actual game is pretty cool. I enjoyed my time with it, but it just didn't last long term because it's fairly quick overall. In terms of what you're doing, it's a deck building game, but I would say it's more so like a deck construction game. So you're going to be using your cards in different ways, like burying them, spending them, putting them in reserve, deploying them, attack. You essentially have your hero, you have your armies, you're clashing against the opposite side and trying to take them down. So you're really doing a lot of deck construction, deck building, kind of that mix. So it's a lighter strategy deck combat game, something in that realm. But yeah, that's my 10th position choice. So we're going to move on to number 9. Number 9 on my list is The Edge Dawnfall. This thing came out in 2018 and was a large undertaking for them. They definitely put this thing inside a coffin-sized box. It had lots of miniatures. As you'll see in a second here in terms of what this game was all about, it's a dynamic miniature and card battle game with elements of territory control. You're gathering crystals and there's campaign play. And that's kind of where it pulled me in, was just all of that wrapped in the fact that there was also a solo mode inside of it that had you going through plots and hitting certain conditions to kind of further the campaign. But that also in its design kind of worked against it, unfortunately. There were certain spots where, you might get to kind of a draw situation, or maybe where the outcome of something was kind of to the point where you knew things were going to go south. It was good. It was solid. I enjoyed my time with it, but today would I recommend that people go out and potentially track it down for solo play? Probably not. But at the time it was released, it was interesting and intriguing. I'd be very much on board with anything that they potentially do with this in the future if they decide to kind of come back to it. But currently, I think I've had my time with it and enjoyed it, which is why it kind of sits at the lower back portion of my list. but it has some really nice looking miniatures to say the least. And the gameplay from a multiplayer perspective is where I think this game really shines more so than a solo. So it belongs on my list, but as I mentioned, it's kind of on the lower tier side of things. In the 8th position on my list, I have Lords of Hellas. This one came out in 2018, and what a production this thing was and still is to this day. Like, I love this thing on the table. It's beautiful. Now, the one thing I'll mention right now when I'm seeing this picture, it brings back memories of the earlier Sun Drop that they actually, I don't know if it was Lord of Hellas was the first one. It was one of the first ones that offered Sun Drop. And I remember the sun drop on these miniatures wasn't all that great. I'll say that right now. It was kind of muddy and everything, but man, did they ever learn. Like, as they continue to go through, especially once it hit Nemesis, is where the sun drop really kind of evolved to a point where it was like, okay, now we're starting to talk. Now we're talking. Like, this is a much better, pre-painted version of what you guys should be offering going forward. And of course, it just got better and better and better as time went on. And of course, painters are going to turn around and say, bah, you can do that on your own. You don't necessarily need sun drop. And that's 100% true. But people like me or others that may not paint at all. I used to paint. I loved painting, but I lost all of my time to the channel. So I don't have time to paint anymore. So having the option for pre-painted is huge for me. So I love that. The game board itself on the table looks phenomenal. The production value of this thing is beautiful. It's one of the reasons I love it so much. But from a solo perspective, and that's what we're really focusing on here, is the fact that when you received your original pledge for this one, your excitement was quite high. You're looking at all these components, and if you bought it for solo play, because it is listed as a 1 to 4 player game, you know, when you set everything up and you start to play through it, you realize that you're only using about a quarter or less of the components for solo play. And I think that was one of the things that kind of drove people to turn around and say, I have to make a hard and fast decision on whether I let this go, because I originally might have bought it for solo play only, or maybe 75% solo and 25% multiplayer. And if I'm only being able to play a quarter of the game components in solo, kind of hurts to hold on to this for just the solo side of the equation. If you were somebody who was buying it primarily for the multiplayer and it was a nice to have the solo, then you're golden. You might be okay with that quarter for the solo mode. But on the flip side, some solo players, some solo individuals were not a fan. For me personally, the production is insane. The multiplayer is really good. And I kind of fell on the 50-50 front where I could see myself playing this multiplayer and solo, and did. So I still have this in my collection right now, even though I wouldn't say that I typically would hold on to a game that only has, me being able to use a small chunk of the game for its solo mode. That does still kind of hurt a little bit. But the cool thing I will say, because that sounds like kind of a bad thing, and it is maybe potentially at the point in time it was for most solo players, but they did re-implement things with Lords of Ragnarok, and there is, of course, potential that they've learned a lot based on the campaign page and what they have promised going forward, that the solo mode will get a bolster. And it should certainly be at a higher level than what was inside the original Lord of Hellas, which should be really nice to see. Now, to what level and how well, all that stuff I can't speak to, because I actually didn't get a prototype for that one. So I wasn't able to determine for myself whether the solo mode was going to be, up to snuff. But I have hopes that is going to occur based on what they learned from the original and the feedback that they got. So there's a lot of potential there. And if you're looking for something like this, a game like this, that's about, you basically have these like ancient machines, mythology, territory building, area majority going on, area movement. Like, these are the kind of games that when I play multiplayer, I actually enjoy playing. So to have the ability to play them solo is just so much fun. If they do a really good job with Ragnarok, that's the train you're going to want to be on. Number 7 on my list belongs to The Great Wall. This came out in 2021. There's been a recent reprint coming through GameFound, and I believe it's beginning to deliver in the near future. I haven't received the solo update pack yet, but I'm looking forward to it. There was a Rulebook 2.0 and solo update pack that was available as part of the reprint. They're trying to essentially streamline the rulebook from the original one. This game, if you're not familiar with it, allows you to play it cooperatively, solo, competitively. Like, it's basically one of those games that kind of can be played multiple different ways, which is a good thing. But then at the same time, I think when it went through its crowdfunding run on the first try through, it had a lot to try to cover in one run. So the solo play was kind of a mixed bag in terms of results. It was good, it was solid, it's on the heavier side of the equation, more likely to do with maybe how the rulebook was structured in the learning process. Something else worth noting too is that as a solo player, you can play it true solo, but you can also play it cooperatively. So you can basically play dual-handed or triple-handed if you feel like it. And it did have the sun drop element as part of it, which is really cool. I have this, I've kept it. It's on my shelf back there. You can see it down there in the corner. I'm waiting for that solo pack to come because I want to see kind of how it's going to bolster things beyond what it was. The only other con I can see around this one was the fact that, I mean, the pro is that it looks absolutely beautiful on the table, but the con is probably the setup time. When you're playing this thing solo, it is kind of a table hog, even when you're playing just by yourself. It's going to take up a lot of space. It might take you 15, 20 minutes to set it up, but it does provide a fun experience. And so if that solo mode that's coming along, or I should say that solo upgrade kit that's coming along in the near future, bolsters things, that could really push this thing way up on my list. But as of right now, I'm pretty comfortable with it in the 7th position. You can kind of see how I've tiered these things from the 10th up to the 7th, as the solo mode progressively gets better on each of these iterations of games from Awaken Realms. And they're not in any specific order by year. There's just certain ones that are sitting on the lower end of this list due to the fact that they have good solo modes, but could potentially be better. My number 6 is Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon. This one was a huge crowdfunding campaign. The game landed in 2019 and was a huge success in the solo community, coming out as a best way to play overall, and I highly recommend this one for solo play. I'm also going to let you guys know, first off, that everything from this position on the list all the way up to the very top of the list have absolutely the highest recommendation from me in terms of the solo aspect of the game. In other words, I think it's up to snuff enough to dive in, to look into it, to research into it, watch some of my playthroughs, find out how it plays, how it operates, see if it fits what you want. But in terms of getting what you want out of a solo experience, this game and going upwards, these are the games you want to talk about. So Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon, it's an adventure. It's going to take you on a gigantic exploration through a Celtic mythology and a whole bunch of other craziness going on. You got the weirdness in play. You're going to have menhirs, which are these statues that you're going to have to light, and that's going to give you a way to kind of push back the weirdness, which of course the weirdness is encroaching on you, which impacts your character. You've got decks for combat and diplomacy. You have checks that will happen as you go through gameplay. You'll be faced with a number of different situations where you're going to have to try to push your way to a success or risk going the opposite way and failure. And that's, of course, going to have ripple effects on your reputation and a number of different aspects of the game. And one of the coolest things I liked about this game was the fact that you could see the actual area of the gameplay changing and molding as you played through it. And I thought that was really cool. So, for instance, if you're looking at something like this and you've got a card here and you interact with a town in the narrative story, and then all of a sudden you do something there, and then a new card comes out and replaces it, it might show the town is now kind of enveloped in flames and has been burnt and is gone. It's just no longer in existence anymore. So like the world in and of itself is changing in different ways. Not only the menhirs being lit to keep the weirdness at bay, to keep your journeys safe, but at the same time, you're also dealing with the fact that the world itself is changing just through interactions as you progress through each chapter in the campaign. And there's a ton here for solo gamers, so you can get real lost in it. Now, the only con, I think the biggest con around this game, if I was going to identify one for people that are wondering, well, what's, on the opposite side of the equation beyond it sounding like a great game, would be the fact that once you get a little bit deep into the chapters, like towards the end, maybe 3/4 the way in, you could get the sense that the game feels a little bit grindy just based on how it does what it does. So in other words, you become familiar with how the flow of the game operates. So it kind of feels like you're kind of going through the motions at certain points. But again, that's just part of the equation. That's with any game, especially for spending good amounts of time with the game, and this one being on the high side of hours that you're going to spend completing those chapters. It's probably pretty normal to get a sense at a certain point that you're kind of feeling a grindiness nature to the feel of everything. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just something to identify that that is there. But for me personally, when I played this, I really enjoy it. I still have it. I'm not going to sell it. It's not leaving my collection. It's awesome. I really enjoy it. And what's even cooler about this one, and I'll kind of go on a little bit more on this trail, is that I got a chance to try the prototype for Kings of Ruin, and I did actually a video on the channel for that as well, showing you guys how that plays and operates. And I can tell you everything that they tweaked about this one is everything that everybody highlighted from the original Tainted Grail as kind of little gripes that they would have liked to have seen done differently. They tweaked those and made them better in Kings of Ruin, and I literally think that Kings of Ruin is going to become the game from the Tainted Grail line of games, as it's a standalone game in and of itself. We don't know much about it beyond just a prototype just yet, for me personally, because that's all I've played. But from what I saw, I was very impressed, and I could see myself having the Tainted Grail series rise up this list even further based on how well Kings of Ruin is received at the solo level. We've now reached top 5 territory, and in the 5th position, I've placed Nemesis. This was an extremely popular crowdfunding campaign that landed in 2018. This was one for the books, and honestly will be a staple in Awaken Realms' catalog of games for solo players for a long time to come. Why it's in the 5th position for me, the game can be played true solo, can be played cooperatively, can also be played competitively. One of the greatest things about Nemesis is the fact that all 3 of those modes work really well. However, I would say that playing the game true solo is probably the weakest of the 3. I prefer to play cooperatively with Nemesis, playing with, controlling 2 characters at once. I also prefer to use the Untold Stories narrative campaign booklet that kind of goes along with the game that came as part of the crowdfunding, which was not only available during the original, but also during reprints later on. It's really cool because it kind of adds a whole thematic tie into the game that you wouldn't otherwise get. This game on the table looks absolutely beautiful. For those of you that don't know anything about it, you have miniatures. You get to see kind of a full interior of a ship. You have crazy win and loss conditions. You have multiple ways the ship can go south. You have multiple ways that you can actually pull off a victory. You're dealing with noise, which is kind of giving you a heads up as to where the aliens potentially could show up. And it's an odds game, basically, as to where they're going to pop up sometimes. And on top of the odds game, there are situations where they'll just appear and you're just completely shocked. So that happens as well. And that just all goes into the theme of not knowing what's around the next corner or what the next right move might be. And that's kind of that sense of dread that's just always around. Are you going to walk right into the nest? Or not, right? And the queen's going to show up at the worst possible time. Like, all those kind of things can potentially happen. It's a blast. It's a blast at all player counts, but from a solo perspective, I would say that out of the rest of the catalog from Awaken Realms, I find a couple other ones to be of a higher up the tier for me. However, I will say this, Nemesis could easily jump to the top 3 position, like 3, 2, or 1. Depending on the time of the year. There's certain times of the year, especially for me, September through November, I am like gunning to play Nemesis for some weird reason. It's like as soon as Halloween comes around or something, I get like all into Arkham and Nemesis and all those kind of games. So, depending on when this list is created, it could actually shift. So it just goes to show that, they're shifting even in my own list within a given year. But I would say on average, I would probably place Nemesis at the 5th position confidently, and I highly recommend it for solo play. My number 4 is Etherfields. This came out in 2020, and man, did I ever get sucked in by the theme of this one. Like, I thought this was, and still is, one of the coolest game developments out of Awaken Realms that they have put together. It is one of the weirdest games to explore that I've ever gone through. It just grabbed me. It was so unique and different and off the wall, and also beautiful at the same time. It all has you kind of going through essentially a dream world, and you're going to experience a whole bunch of craziness. And that's part of the whole situation is the unknown, not knowing what's really going on in here. Now, the game is so eccentric in terms of how it's designed, laid out, displayed, the art, everything about it, the miniatures, that there can be a barrier to entry in terms of just taking a look at it on the game table and getting a grasp as to how the mechanisms work. And the original rulebook wasn't all that great at kind of lining those things up, but as time has gone on, those things have been revised. The 2.0 rulebook went out, which is a much better implementation. There were also some additional reference material that went out that much better handholds you through the experience at the very beginning and teaches you what you need to know when you need to know it, versus kind of dumping a whole bunch of things on you that you may not need to necessarily know out of the gate. So it does a better job of introducing you to the experience overall. This is one that I would say that at the very, and you can tell from the reviews alone here on Board Game Geek, it's still in the great territory. And it's crazy about that is when it first landed, there was a lot of reviews that came out that tried to take this game and fire it in the trash. Like basically saying like, this is no good. It has no merit. It's no, you can't get through it. It's a slog. It's bad. That obviously did nothing to it. And this is one of those ones that I love to kind of root for the underdog games, the games that get slandered in reviews and everything else, where people just kind of hop on the train to say like it's a terrible game. I really enjoy watching that happen when I know those individuals are wrong. And I think there's something to be said about Etherfields that it managed to not only push through all of that, but then come out on the other side a better game. Pretty impressive. And also to hold on to a rating like it has here on Board Game Geek. For me personally, this is one that sits up high on my shelf. I'm never selling that thing. It is like a thing of beauty to me. Like I'm not letting it go. The gameplay is unique. I enjoy my time with it. As I've shown you through some of the pictures here and stuff like that, the artwork on the cards is just like off the wall. The miniatures are gorgeous. The gameplay is fun, and it's one of those things where once you get into it, you kind of get sucked into it because you can't possibly guess what's coming around the next corner. Like you just don't know. The game's going to throw all kinds of weird stuff at you, and you're just going to be going through it because I mean, a dream just basically opens up unlimited possibilities for how wacky it can get. And that's exactly what you have going on in this one. So I would recommend that if you have not checked out Etherfields, or you potentially gave it a pass in the past, that you revisit this thing and take a look at it now, because I think what it has to offer solo players is something of extreme value, and you will get your money's worth out of this one for sure. All right, we've reached top 3 territory, and in the 3rd position, I've placed Nemesis Lockdown. And to be honest, if this game didn't exist, which came out in 2022 very recently, the original Nemesis would be in this 3rd position. But Nemesis Lockdown, in my opinion, is a better game. I like it more. Now, there's 2 different approaches to this one. Some people might say they like the previous original one, just based on the fact it's in the spaceship, and that kind of calls to them more so than Nemesis Lockdown. For me personally, what they did with Nemesis Lockdown and what they learned from the original Nemesis by bringing things to Mars and having you on a station on Mars, and then introducing a bunch of other things to kind of spice things up. They introduced power to the equation. So basically on the map itself, you kind of have an elevator going on, and that elevator can essentially either give you power to certain floors and not others, which have immediate impacts to the gameplay in terms of darkness and just the effect of how much of an advantage that can be for the intruders versus you. And of course, if you do have power, then you have the availability to use the computer systems on that floor and things like that. So they just thematically tied in some things. Again, more things about the whole horror element of what's going on, even more entrenched now. So that theme just got even more cool. They just took it to another level. And I remember when I played the prototype for this, I was like, oh, this is great. Like, you couldn't have come up with another version of Nemesis and nailed it as well as the original like they did with Lockdown. I mean, they took the same thing, but then they just added layers that just made sense and then surprised me in a number of different areas on top of it. This is a really fun one for solo play and follows a similar vein. You can play it true solo, you can play it cooperatively, you can play it competitively. You have the untold stories that also trail off into Lockdown as well, so you can also get that narrative pull. And again, wait on both of them, whether in 3rd position or 5th position between the 2 Nemesis. They're both on the upper end of the weight side of things. So there's a bunch of rules, there's a bunch of kind of nuances that you learn, and sometimes you'll play a couple times and actually learn you've been playing something incorrectly for a while. So that does happen. So there is a learning curve there, but I would go out on a limb to say it's worth absolutely every single play to get to a point where you fully understand it. It is an experience that is unique, and it'll make you come back to the table many, many times. Both of them are phenomenal. We're now down to the last 2 slots on my top 10 list for Awaken Realms. The second one belongs to ISS Vanguard and absolutely deserves it. This one is a gem of a solo game. If you have not heard of this one, if you're looking for an epic space adventure game that you can play solo, look no further. This is the best thing that Awaken Realms has released in that regard easily. Nemesis nails it from an alien vibe kind of equation on the horror side of the equation. But if you want space exploration, it's ISS Vanguard hands down. This thing is a very, very special production. And not only did it come out of the gates firing on all cylinders, it's been extremely well received. I've done a whole bunch of content on this thing, from its prototype forums to its in-between development to its final release. We've done a couple after release gameplay videos, multiple of them on the channel. I enjoy this one a lot, and I have fun every single time I show it off. It's just cool because it has so much, again, very similar to what Nemesis brought to the table when it came out. It just melds together so many interesting and unique mechanisms all together that just seamlessly work. It just works and it makes sense and it flows, and I enjoy it a lot. I have a lot of fun with this one. So as a solo player, if you have not checked this one out or heard about it, you need to look into it. It is out in the, like all the games were mentioned on this list, they're all out in the wild. Some of them might be hard to get, again, because Awaken Realms does like to go to crowdfunding for a large majority of its games, but they do reprints quite often, which means there's typically quite a bit of them out there, and there's always people that are selling them secondhand as well as an opportunity to pick games up. But ISS Vanguard, definitely don't miss the boat on this one. Well, my friends, we made it to the very top of the list, and in the #1 position, without a shadow of a doubt in my mind, is This War of Mine, the board game, coming out in 2017 for Awaken Realms, published by them and then handed off to Galacta for retail distribution afterwards. But this one sits in Awaken Realms' catalog of games as they were the ones that published it, and so they're getting credit for it in my books as they were at the helm when it originally released. I will tell you this right now, this game is a masterpiece, and I've said this a bajillion times throughout forums, I've said it on Facebook posts, I've said it across the board every time I see this game, and one thing I will say is I don't see this game being sold very often. This is one of those games that I don't see on the secondhand market very often. People that get this game tend to keep it, and they keep it for the long haul. For me personally, this is a game that can't be matched from its emotional weight, gravity, and everything around its subject matter. I mean, you're civilians trapped in a war-torn city, making difficult decisions to survive. That essentially encompasses it at the highest level. But I cannot stress to you how much the decisions that you make inside of this game, if you have any familiarity with the video game and the efforts that went in to talking to individuals that dealt with the citizens that dealt with war-torn cities and the stories that went into that, and all of that pushed into the video game, the board game, you know, you're getting realistic, like the journal, the different stories that you read through while you play through the game, all coming from a realistic place, gives a weight to this game that is unlike anything that's out there. There is not a single game in the board game hobby that even comes close to invoking the same kind of reactions from you and the feeling that you're going to get after making a tough decision. Because in this game, you will get to certain spots where you're going to have to make a choice of maybe 2 to 3 different tough choices you have to make between. You have to figure out which of them you're going to do. None of them really seem like a good option. And then once you make that choice, you then have to live through the consequences of that choice. And you don't even know how that's going to pan out for the better. Like in most board games, there's always like a happy path. This War of Mine has kind of a mitigation path, and not all the choices are positive. In most cases, they're not positive. So it's really, really heavy that way. So the one thing I will say is that there's a lot of people that you'll see in forums and stuff like that when they're talking about this particular game, is they'll sit there and say, it's really depressing. Like it's the kind of game you can only play once and you really can't play much more than that. Well, I would argue that. I would say that there are certain topics within the game that could be triggering for some people based on their own personal experiences. So that would be my major warning with this one, is that if you've had, let's say, trauma in your life in certain areas, this one could be even heavier for you than normal. If you haven't, you might be able to go through this and take it more as a learning experience as to what kind of horrors come out of a war-torn environment where civilians that are not even directly involved in a war are having the ripple effects kind of just pushed all over top of them, even if they don't want them. And that's what's happening here. You have these individuals that don't want to be part of the conflict. They're just trying to survive through it. But how horrible that is on full display all the way through the game. So, but the crazy thing about this game is just how well designed it is. I mean, the board layout is fantastic. I'm trying to find a really good example here of the game state that's not so dark. Like, here we go. This is a good picture of the. It's a fantastic layout. It has your visitors, your characters, your events, your objectives, your fate. Like, it has all these different aspects that make you feel like you truly are living in that house. You're truly ripping through the rubble, building different things to try to keep those individuals warm, heated, happy, as you know, again, content, let's say, not happy, but just content to whatever level content means in this situation, which is the lowest bare minimum possible. And then you're also sending them out to go scavenge and find things and bring things back. But at the same time, you have raiders that will show up at nighttime and try to take what you have. And if you're smart enough, you'll take your stuff and not store everything in your house, and you'll store it at certain locations so that the raiders don't get it. Like, you find all these nuanced behaviors within the system to try to survive. And that's what you're doing. You have all these bad things happening, and you've got to mitigate it all constantly until you get to the end of it. And the expansions that you can pick up for this one really bolster things. They also start to expand beyond just the game board you're seeing here. You start to be able to, when you go to these locations that are far distant or close, you kind of start seeing maps of the kind of inner city areas where you can kind of explore, into sewers and a bunch of other different areas that really start to kind of just make this whole experience even larger scale than just feeling like you're kind of tucked away into a home. But like I said, it's one of those games that you will make a decision, you will see a ripple effect maybe initially, and then you will see a ripple effect potentially down the line even. Like, it's so cool in that aspect that whatever choices you make have those impacts, and they will impact you when they happen. So it's like a double whammy, unlike most board games where it's like, yep, sure, I saved these resources because I knew I was going to try to create this one item. Oh, and look, I created that one item. That's great. But it's kind of just a generic thing. Like, it's not invoking any kind of emotion. You're just doing it. It's just like you're on an assembly line. This War of Mine invokes emotion with everything you do in terms of decisions and how you plan things and everything else. It pulls something out of you that no other board game will pull out of you. And it's a masterpiece for that because it does it realistically, and it does it without kind of what's the right word? Kind of overdoing it. Like, overdoing it to the point of like embellishing it for its own gain. It's not doing it for that reason. It's doing it because it's realistic. This is literally what happens to civilians in these situations. And I think there's a whole learning aspect to this that people can come out the other side and say, wow, war is pretty horrific. Even when you're like, it's horrific for the people involved 100%, the individuals that have to fight on the front lines and are fighting. But look how horrific it is for the individuals that have nothing to do with the conflict and are just stuck in the middle. That's really what this game focuses on. And for me as a solo game, this is an all-time great. We're talking top 5 ever solo games, without a shadow of a doubt. There's no other game that will probably be developed in the near future that I can see that will top this game for its emotion level. It's not possible, because everybody can play this game and pull something out of it that will hit you like a ton of bricks. And I don't know if there's a way to do that again, to be honest. I don't think there is. So I think this one's going to like stand kind of alone on its own mountain as being something in the board game industry that will never be recreated in the same way. And for that reason, it's extremely special on that side of the equation. But from the solo gameplay side of things, the gameplay is phenomenal. And just like that, we've reached the end of the top 10 solo games from Awaken Realms, and I really hope that this list helps you make an informed decision on some of their games. A large number of them are widely known about, so there shouldn't be too many shockers on this list, but there might be some games that you have been eyeing and haven't really dug into yet that might pique your interest to dig back into again. Games like Etherfields, for instance, or games you might have kind of passed over in the past. Speaking of Etherfields, that actually might be one that in the future I get back to the channel and a playthrough, as I never really did a final release playthrough. I did a prototype playthrough, but that was about it. So I'd like to come back to it and revisit it at some point when I have the chance to. So that's certainly something of interest. A couple things I want to ask from you guys in the comments below is if you could list your top 10 or top 7 or 5 or 3, whatever number you've played from Awaken Realms. If you could do that, that really helps other individuals coming into this video to also see a general sense of the lists across the community, not just mine, but also yours, to get a sense or a gauge as to which solo experiences are considered the best. So I would recommend that you do that. Again, you don't need a full list of 10, even top 3 or top 5 is perfectly fine. Because usually in those top 10 lists, usually when you get to that top 5, top 3 category, those are the ones that are really kind of you're most excited about. So there's that. Now, the other thing I want to mention, completely disconnected from that, is the Rolling Solo Discord community. If you have not checked that out, I definitely recommend you do. We have a whole bunch of channels, all specific to different areas of the solo gaming hobby. People are in and out of all the different channels and threads, constantly talking all day long about solo games, which is awesome. I pop in there myself and add to the conversation as well. And then if you're not interested in being on Discord, or you even are and already on there, or you plan to be, there's still also the Rolling Solo board game Facebook group that you can jump in on that has 7,000 members right now, and there's constant chatter in that one as well. So either way, you can go into both or one of, whichever one you prefer, but I wanted to provide those opportunities for the community to kind of connect beyond just watching the videos here on YouTube. So that's awesome. The final thing I'm going to ask in the comments below, beyond just putting in your top X list for Awaken Realms, is also letting me know what next publisher you would like to see in this series of top 10s that I'm putting together right now. So let me know what other publisher that has a decent catalog of solo games. And again, it doesn't have to necessarily be up to 10. I could even do a short list of top 5 if we have a publisher that has a lot less. But what publisher would that be? Let me know in the comments below. Would love to hear that feedback as well. Thank you guys so much for watching. And as always, keep on rolling solo.